Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Zoom at 8. My name is Julianne Peterson, and I am your host every Tuesday night for Zoom at 8. As well, I am a loan officer for Old Capital Lending. You know, we've been doing lending for 38 years. We've closed over 8,000 loans. And in this market, it is tough to get loans and to capital raise. So this Zoom at 8, while we've been doing it for 5 years, you can start today meeting your next partner. Again, it's all about relationships. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Why the heck do I have a warden on who's going to talk about prisoners when we should be talking about commercial real estate? No, everybody, it is about relationships. And especially as a warden, especially as a prisoner, it's going to serve you well to know about these relationships that are created over time, not only in prison, but also outside of prison. So if you are working on a deal, I'd love to have the opportunity to do the debt for you. You know, we do bank, we do bridge, we do agency, we do CMBS, help with gap funding. All of those are going to need to be underwritten before you put in an LOI. You don't want to be going in and putting in an offer if you don't know what the lender's going to bring. Because I have been on too many deals where a person goes out and says, okay, I'm going to pay $6 million for this deal, and the lender can only bring in 50%. That's a big difference when it comes to your return. Remember, the more leverage you get from the lender, the more money I'm going to bring to the deal, the better the returns. So in that case, when somebody paid too much, they look like a knucklehead and they may lose the deal, right? You're going to lose confidence in the in the seller and on the broker. So always good to check in. I'm going to need your T12, your rent roll, your underwriting, and if there's an offering memorandum, I'll take that as well. So we've got a small group tonight, and make sure that you put your information in the chat, okay? Who you are, where you live, what you're working on, your contact information, because this is like going to a conference where you don't have to pay for a hotel room, rent a car, right? The exorbitant amount for the conference itself. So it's all free. I wanted to bring somebody special who can have you look at relationships a little bit differently. I was introduced to the warden, Darren Wallace, when I heard a keynote speaker named Damon West. He spoke at Vertical Street Ventures National Conference a few years ago, and I was amazed by his story. And I want to preface this conversation with this true story so you can really see the impact that Darren Wallace has had on building relationships within the prison system. Doesn't necessarily need to just be in commercial real estate, but relationships are the key to success. Just like I say, you need to build relationships. You need to see how important relationships are to any aspiring adventure. So Damon West, here's the background on Damon West. He was a high school and collegiate football star who, however, got injured and derailed his college football career, and he turned to drugs to deal with the disappointments of his life. He was a dysfunctional addict. He graduated in 1999, where he went on to work as a congressional aide in the U.S. Congress. He was a national fundraiser for the U.S. presidential campaign and a stockbroker for UBS. And this is like the top biggest bank in the world. So it would be the Wall Street job at UBS that would change Damon's life forever and the lives of so many other innocent people forever. That's where another stockbroker turned Damon onto meth. And this was his first time this person, the stockbroker, introduced him to this drug. And within 18 months, Damon lost everything and was homeless on the streets of Dallas. That's when he became a criminal to support his habit. Damon's autobiography, The Change Agent, you should all read it. It's called The Change Agent, gives a firsthand account of how he and his crew evaded capture for 2 years by breaking into people's homes in upscale Dallas neighborhoods. Not only did he steal their property, he stole something much more valuable from these victims. He stole their sense of security, with most of them will not be able to get it back for the rest of their lives. So on July 30th, 2008, it all came to an end when the Dallas SWAT team raided an apartment that Damon was in, and they captured the Uptown burglar. After a 6-day jury trial of his peers, Damon was found guilty for the most overwhelming evidence that it took them only 15 minutes to deliberate to decide his fate. And on May 18, 2009, the case was finally over, and they brought him back into the courtroom for the judge to read the sentence out loud. The jury sentenced Damon West to 65 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The state of Texas, 65 years is considered a life sentence. He was assigned to one of the toughest prison assignments in Texas, the Mark W. Stiles Unit, a supermax prison in Beaumont, Texas. Condemned to life in a Texas maximum security prison for organized crime, Damon was thrown into one of the most difficult environments on earth, where he used his transformative coffee bean message to navigate adversity and find redemption. So I don't want to go too deep into this message, this coffee bean. Another book you should also read, The Coffee Bean. But knowing the context of this story, it all goes like this. Life is like a pot of boiling water in which you have 3 choices of how to respond. Be like a carrot. When it goes into boiling water, it's hard when it goes in, but as it boils, it becomes soft. You can go into prison and become as an egg, which the insides are soft, but once it hits the water, it gets hardened. Or you could be a coffee bean, which changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. So the power is inside the coffee bean, which is yourself, to change the world around you. The coffee bean is the only thing that can change the water because it is the change agent. And after serving 7 years of this life sentence, the parole board came to evaluate his case. And on November 16, 2015, which is 7 years later, inmate West, number 1585689, reclaimed his identity as Damon West and was released from the Texas prison. However, he was far from being a free man. He had signed an agreement to be on parole until 2073. And this is where we have our expert warden, Darren Wallace, as a key role in the renewal of Damon's life. Darren is a retired Texas Department of Criminal Justice Senior Warden, a young retiree. He's completed a paralegal professional certificate program at SMU in Dallas. Due to his strong desire to continue making lasting impacts within the community, Darren has been admitted to the University of North Texas College of Law. He's entering the class of 2024 to work towards his doctorate of jurisprudence. He's going to be an attorney. So Darren will share with us his special relationship he has had in and out of prison with Damon West that supports this idea that relationships matter. So this is going to be a fantastic and really special evening. And so as we welcome you, Darren Wallace, to Zoom at 8, I want to make sure that everybody gives him all of our attention. If you would go to the top of your screen and find the 9 little dots, and that will change the view so we see and give all of our attention to Darren Wallace. Darren, welcome to Zoom at 8. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What an amazing story that you have. Not to preclude all of Damon's success, but it wasn't without you that he was able to live and walk this world as a free man. And I
Right.
was touched by his story. I watch him at every opportunity I can. I watch him on Facebook and LinkedIn, and he is a pretty special guy.
I agree.
And and but what is so amazing is your story, and I wanted to bring everybody here because you have touched so many lives on the inside as well as in the outside of prison. And I want to hear your story. I want to know how you, even in, as not a prisoner, but in many ways, you also walked the coffee bean story. Because as most wardens, we think you're hard as nails. You and I shared a story of a woman who was going to work in the prison system. And she was told when she got there to do training, they said, if you're here to punish these prisoners, this is not the job for you. So if you would
Right.
walk us through your process, talk to us about your life as a, you know, uh, death row uh, person, how you worked with these people, and then going into the warden and so many different locations and positions. I think it would be super helpful.
Great. I'll just kind of give a quick bio of myself. I started my career with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in 1991 as a correctional officer at the Ellis Unit in Huntsville, Texas. I worked death row as a correctional officer for about 3 years until I promoted to sergeant at a unit in South Texas in 1994 called the McConnell Unit, which is a 3,000 bed maximum security facility. And from there, I promoted to lieutenant, captain, major, assistant warden, warden. And grand total during my career, I worked 12 different facilities, six of those as a senior warden. When I met Damon, I was an assistant warden at the Stiles unit in Beaumont. It's a 3,000 bed maximum security unit. And Damon had been in a fight with another inmate, which isn't uncommon in big prisons, but it was unusual for him and the other guy. Neither one had ever had a disciplinary case. They'd both been locked up over 5 years. And those cases were graded as major, which I won't get too far in the weeds, but there's major cases and minor cases. Major cases have liberty interest attached. So good, good time earning status, which goes toward getting out of prison early. Whereas a minor case, you're looking at, really inconvenience kind of punishments, commissary restriction, recreation restriction. I called out Damon and the other guy he got into the fight with just to determine what it was about. There was no kind of gang related issue. There was no racial issue involved. Nobody got hurt. It was just kind of middle of the summer. Temperatures were high. Prisons aren't air conditioned in Texas for the most part. It happened. So downgraded those cases to minor, sent them on their way. And the other guy that Damon got into the fight with, he did what I would expect most people to do when they're talking to a warden, because you can imagine the day-to-day interaction between an individual that's incarcerated and a warden on a unit that large is pretty small. The coming face to face with a warden doesn't happen real often, and usually not in positive circumstances. So the other guy, man, he grabbed his stuff, he took off, he was gone, didn't look a gift horse in the mouth. He was done with it. Damon, on the other hand, didn't do that. Damon made a point of trying to have a conversation. Well, you can imagine that environment, you're suspicious of somebody trying to be friendly to you, right? So I kind of listened, sent him on his way. But over time, I began interacting with him and came to see that he was actually trying to do better. So I provided him some opportunities, better housing area, as he became eligible for it, gave him a job with some responsibility. And when I gave him that job, what I told him was, look, what I'm doing, I'm not giving you a job, I'm giving you rope. And I'm giving you enough rope, you can either pull yourself out of this environment or you can hang yourself. It's going to be one of those two things. Well, Damon, being who he is, pulled himself out. Now, he was up for parole or up for parole review when he got that disciplinary case. Had he been found guilty of a major case, he would not have made parole. It would have automatically put off his review for a year and potentially more. And it would have kept him living in the same cell block he was living in, which, based on the length of his sentence, he was with other guys who were doing that much time. Most of them weren't there for organized criminal activity. They were murderers and rapists and a different sort of criminal. So Damon took the opportunities he was given, not just by me, but by some other people, and saw life beyond prison. So when he got parole, and I was updated because his mother and I established a friendly relationship. So she called me when he made parole. I was working on another facility as a senior warden, and he came back to the area I was working in, which was the Beaumont, Texas area, and came to see me and had just published The Change Agent. And he kind of sheepishly gave me a copy and said, yeah, you might want to look at these pages because you're in there. And that whole story was outlined without my name because I think he was afraid I'd sue him. I'm not real sure. But from that, I interacted with him a few more times. He started coming into prison speaking and had a few athletes he brought into prison from colleges that those guys were kind of going the wrong way. So I don't want to call it a scared straight sort of thing, but just sort of come look at the environment you're headed toward. And I interacted with him during one of those for a player from the University of Georgia. When I retired, we were living, gosh, probably 10 minutes from Damon, where he was living in the Beaumont area. So I just sent him a text, hey, I retired. If you get a chance, let's have lunch one day. Well, next thing I know, I'm talking to Lionsgate Studio because he was in talks with them for something. And it just, our relationship started growing. COVID happened, and we all know the world shut down. When everything started coming back up, I got a call from Damon one day introducing me to a woman named Sherry Garcia, and I saw there was somebody else here that's from Dallas. She was in DCO magazine recently, and she has a company named Cornbread Hustle. And what it is a second chance staffing agency. So helping guys with felony convictions who get out of prison get jobs with a future. So that, one of the big barriers to reentry is employment. And it is just under housing because with a felony conviction, it's extremely hard to find a place to live or place to rent, especially, and a job because that conviction tends to keep you out of those. And Sherry and I kind of hit it off. So my wife and I moved to the Dallas area and I went to work for Cornbread Hustle and did that for a while. And then some other things happened where I kind of stepped away from that. I still have a great relationship with them, but I went toward other opportunities. But that relationship continues to this day. In fact, I texted with Damon earlier today about something. But when I decided to apply to law school, this is kind of the full circle moment of the relationship to me. I reached out to Damon because 53-year-old applying to law school, finished my undergraduate degree eons ago, had some graduate work done, had a pretty good LSAT score, former prison warden, not your typical law school applicant. Probably the best way to say that. And I reached out to Damon and said, hey, write me a letter of recommendation. And he wrote a fantastic letter. And I'm convinced that between my personal statement and his letter, that's the whole reason I got admitted to law school. When I had my initial interactions with Damon, nowhere in my mind did I foresee talking to people in Hollywood or having him help me get a job or help me get into law school. You know, it absolutely, my interactions with him in the beginning and certainly during my career while I was employed were professional. And the opportunities I gave to him were the same opportunities I would extend to anybody who was trying, anybody who wanted to do better and was serious about it. And while Damon is a very public face because of his notoriety and success, there's other guys that check in with me all the time to this day that are out and doing well because they also got that sort of opportunity. And I know what public perception is of what a prison warden is or what a correctional officer is. Those of you, few of y'all had joined while Julianne and I were having a conversation about the public perception of corrections and law enforcement and the media, how that narrative is fed based on what's going to get people to tune in. A lot of positive things happen in prison, and I am not unique among prison employees in what I feel like is beneficial. The area of law I want to go into is actually criminal defense and appeals. And a big part of that isn't that I don't think people should get sentenced to prison for crimes. It's that I think there's a lack of equity in prison sentences themselves. You know, I interacted with people who were doing 5 years for killing somebody and then turn right around and talk to somebody doing 25 years for having 6 ounces of weed. Completely different kinds of crime and completely disparate sentences. So I feel like without correcting some of those inequities, there will be absolutely no improvement. I could soapbox about that. I really won't, because this is about relationships. So,
well, let me just start to
sure.
kind of steer this. So we talk about relationships in commercial real estate. We all have to partner with each other. We have to have a team that we're putting together. In prison, you probably have your parole officer and you've got your cellmate and you have the warden and you have all of those people around you. But in commercial real estate, we have the underwriter and we have your capital raiser and we have the asset manager. And a lot of people want to jump into these relationships quickly. And as a warden, you have to build the trust, both the trust from a prisoner and as a trust from the staff.
Right.
So can you tell us, kind of walk us through, while it's equal in so many ways for commercial real estate and building partnerships, how did you do that? How did you build this trust over a time period where you were serving somebody both from a staff perspective and from a prisoner perspective?
The first thing was there's absolutely no such thing as leading from an office. So, in order to establish relationships, you have to interact with the people that you're impacting. You can sit in an office and make a decision based just on what's on paper
Mm.
and make the wrong decision just because you don't understand the dynamics involved and you don't understand the personalities involved. I made a point of being present during at least one meal a day, because that is where everybody comes to a central area to eat. So you're going to interact with the vast majority of the population. And I didn't turn anybody away from talking to them. Because you can imagine in any business, you're going to come across people who have never seen somebody they didn't want to be face to face with and capitalize their time, whether they had anything significant to talk about or not. But you can usually determine pretty quickly, especially in a prison environment, whether it's something you need to talk about, something you don't. A lot of times, just listening to a concern and not even giving them what they want necessarily, not offering advice, but listening, people work their own problems out. And being available to them so that they can do that and so that they're comfortable speaking to you is probably, for me, was one of the most important relationship building activities. I would talk to anybody. And then with the staff, I went to where they were. You know, you can imagine going to the warden's office is much like going to the principal's office.
Mhm.
You don't picture a whole lot of good coming from there, right?
Yeah.
Um, I cannot think of any positive interaction I ever had in a principal's office, and I went there a few times. It was always much more, or you felt much more appreciated if a conversation happened where you were. So going to where somebody is working at that moment and having a conversation you could have over the phone,
Hmm.
but having it face to face instead, where they are in their comfort zone, inspired trust in that they knew you were willing to take that time out of your day just to go talk to them. To, if they had something that they were concerned about, address those concerns. That worked with the incarcerated population also, where you go to where they were, whether it was the chow hall, whether if you're talking about a segregation area, walking the cell blocks and going to each cell. Um, there, the most embarrassing thing to me that could happen is if my boss came to my unit and somebody on that unit didn't know who I was.
Wow.
If I did not have name and face recognition, then there was an issue with my performance.
So
And
is
I
that
think
is that pretty common for a warden to know all of the prisoners, or are you talking about just the staff?
them knowing me
Uh-huh.
was really the more, you know, I'm good with names and faces, but I'm not that good. 3,000 guys, that's a lot. So
Yeah.
normally the people that you know as the warden by a face and name are either guys you interact with every day because they work in your area or guys who are troublemakers. A lot like kids in school. I guarantee you, by the time I hit high school, one of the assistant principals knew who I was. The head guy, he didn't have a clue. And
And you
I
were
knew,
also you were also making relationships with the family members as well. They would
right,
call you on a regular basis. So you were reaching out, you were hitting all types of relationships within that
right.
person's life.
In fact, before I was sure about Damon, I ended up speaking to both of his parents. separately, his mom and his dad. You know, his dad was a pretty well-known sports writer. And so he called me wanting to donate a bunch of books. And of course, state agency, if it's free, we'll take it.
Mhm.
Uh, Money's hard to come by for that kind of thing. But his mother would call and just have conversations with me, you know, and she was a realist. She knew where Damon was and knew why he was there. So there was no, we weren't starting from a point of
Mm.
me having to explain, well, he's in trouble because she already knew.
Mm.
Um, Not all family members were like that, but many of the positive interactions I had and the high points of my day had to were talking to family members because a lot of times, you know, think of it as the teacher hates me. You know, why'd you get in trouble? The teacher hates me. That
Mm.
translates into the prison environment. So a lot of
Mm.
those calls you get, you know, hey, my son, my husband, my brother, whoever said this, and this happened. Well, okay. Let me tell you from a different perspective. And by having an honest conversation about any issues and listening to their concerns and addressing those concerns, you find a point where you can work together. Where at the end of the day, they want them to go home, and I want them when they go home, they don't come back. You know, reducing recidivism. I don't want them back in here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, there will be enough new customers. We didn't need repeats.
Yeah.
And there were times, you know, in other groups, I talked a lot about generational incarceration,
Mm.
um, where the same members of the same family in different generations go to prison. They follow the
Mhm.
same patterns.
Mhm.
And I won't really go deep on what I believe are the big causes of that. But one of the ways you combat it is you have to have patient zero, where this guy got the point. He's not coming back, and he's going to be a positive influence on those in his family younger than he is, whether it's sons, younger brothers, younger sisters,
Mm.
nieces, nephews, whoever it is that he's interacting with, to where going to prison is not a normal part of life. And there are, in generational incarceration, those families, I'm not going to say see it as a rite of passage, but they see it as an eventuality that they're going to go to prison. And that the only way prisons can truly address that is by putting out a better product. You know, at the end of the day, through relationships and programming, they get the point. They don't want to come back. They want to reenter society successfully. You know, and a lot of guys do. You know, you hear about recidivism and the revolving door of the criminal justice system. It's not what it was 20 years ago. It gets better and slowly gets better. But in order to keep that going, programming in prisons and funding for that programming and putting people in place who have the right mindset. You know, a lot of people,
Mm.
Shawshank Redemption, you know, Stephen King got prison culture right when he wrote that. Um,
Mm.
there's always an Andy, there's always a Red. Uh, those things happen, and the things that they demonstrate as far as the prison population happen. But when you talk about the staff, people see Warden Norton. You know, if you've seen the movie, you know he's the guy who's using inmate labor to line his own pockets
Mm.
by basically cutting everybody else in the area out of the market for manual labor. Um, That's not today's reality of prison systems. If you find that in corrections right now, I would wager it'd be in small county jails. It's
Mm,
not going to be in a major prison system.
mm.
Certainly not at that scale. But the public perception is that's the person, or it's Percy Wetmore from the Green Mile, um, who just takes a lot of pleasure in causing discomfort and pain just because he can. Um,
So let me jump in here for just a minute.
sure.
You talked a lot about being firm and fair.
Right.
We talk a lot about that with our children, being fair but firm. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of children, when you set up those restrictions, if you want to call them guidance, being firm and fair with your children, they know what their limitations are. They know how much they can push you. When we have investors in our deals, we want to be communicating with them. We want to be firm and saying this is our deal. This is where we're at. We want to constantly be communicating if things are changing. We also want to be fair that, hey, maybe something is not working out the way that we anticipated it. Kind of talk about firm and fairness in the prison system. What worked well for you, and is it what worked well for you the same as what works for other wardens?
Firm, fair, and consistent is kind of a mantra that's beaten into new correctional officers. And when you start, the most important word you can know is no.
Mhm.
If you don't know the answer, it's no. I'll find out. But right now, the answer is no. By being the same person every day, if if I am firm, fair, and consistent today, it confuses everybody and ruins everything if I come in tomorrow and I'm erratic, unfair,
Mm.
and vulgar. It's just those things don't work. So by being firm in that environment and in many environments, if somebody can run over you and get their way just because they push harder than you do, you're doing yourself no favor, you're doing your business no favor, you're doing no one except the bully a favor. Being firm doesn't mean that you're a jerk. It just means that you have boundaries and you set boundaries and live by those boundaries. Fair, fair does not necessarily mean equal, but it
Mm.
means giving the same consideration to, because not everybody's the same. If we use the Damon in his fighting case example,
Yeah.
he had never been written up for a fight before. He had no disciplinaries for anything. So giving him some grace, showing grace, made sense. Whereas if it had been somebody who had been in 3 fights this year and had a cell phone last year and caused problems all the time, I could consider doing the same thing, but I might not because
Mm.
it's not, it wouldn't be fair to people who are doing the right thing to let somebody who's doing the wrong thing consistently get the same benefit.
Would it be fair to say that if somebody has good behavior and has a relationship with you, or the warden, internal staff, that they can get further with less punishment and shorten your sentence? Is that fair to say?
Yes and no. Um, just because you have a good relationship with me doesn't give you a pass. You know, if if I extend trust to somebody and they take advantage of that trust, then I don't have incentive to show grace. If you talk about your children with kids, if you give them a boundary and they consistently disregard that boundary and go beyond. A curfew might be a good example. Then being nice about it every time just isn't going to work. You have to pull that back in. You have to become stricter, and that's kind of how that works. You know, it is, as a warden, I would extend a small amount of trust, and if it wasn't taken advantage of, I'd give a little bit more, because if somebody doesn't learn that they're worthy of trust, then when they're released, they don't feel as though they're trustworthy. They're more likely to be dishonest. Whereas if they learn the value of earning trust and taking advantage of the benefits of trust without taking advantage of the person who extends it, then they're much more likely to succeed, I think.
So,
So
so
trust was given.
do you have examples of people like Damon? I mean, is this something that happens more often than not, where we have a guy who comes from a good family? He comes from he's probably middle American parents. And it was interesting. He stayed local, close by his family, which a lot of times they don't do, which was
Right.
another interesting piece of that. But do you see that we are rehabilitating people and getting them out when they have I don't know if you want to say a certain circumstance, but they are living a true, good, respectful life in prison?
I think the guys who come in and recognize that they've hit rock bottom
Hmm.
and don't think that rock bottom's normal have the potential to build themselves up. I I don't want to say that somebody from Damon's background. I want to say Damon really is the exception of somebody
Hmm.
who comes from a middle class background, who had advantages and privileges, who went to prison. My experience was many of those guys, unlike Damon, their parents made excuses for them.
Hmm.
They're 40-year-old men whose mom still thinks the teacher hates him.
Hmm.
Um, that entitlement doesn't stop. And
Interesting.
I think it has to do with your raised. And I think being raised correctly does not necessarily demote or denote a particular socioeconomic status. I think you have good families in every socioeconomic status, and I think you have crappy families,
Hmm.
every, everyone. I mean, if it weren't for America's middle class, we would not have all the videos of Karens,
That's
plain and
true.
simple. Um, so I think really he's the exception.
Hmm.
I think most of the success stories, most of the guys who check in with me came from strong families but did not have those advantages.
Hmm.
There's a group of about 10 guys who on a fairly regular basis either text me or hit me through Facebook or call me just to let me know how they're doing. Um,
I love that. I mean,
and
it's
only
it's so impactful to me when I hear you helped him inside the prison system and he's helping you outside of the prison system. I
well,
mean, that is such a beautiful relationship.
our friendship is unique. I will say definitely our friendship's unique. And I value it. I never thought, just by extending grace, extending some trust, a small bit at a
Mm.
time, and helping him, that in the end he would be helping me get a job after retirement, helping me get into law school. Um, and that's not something I expected. You know, when you extend grace to somebody, you're doing that for their benefit, not for yours, other than forgiveness.
Mm.
forgiveness is more about you than them. But giving somebody grace is extending some trust to them with the sincere desire that they do better, that they have an opportunity. So providing an opportunity to somebody when there's no return on the investment for you that you can foresee, I'm a firm believer that the good in the world that you do comes back to you. And I think with Damon and I, that's kind of an example of the good you do comes back. But that relationship building, in many ways, I was selfish in how I did it because I did want a return on investment, but not for me personally. I wanted it for the environment they lived in and the environment my staff worked in. Because when there's that trust, with that population trusts the people who are in charge of them, who are responsible for them, it it lessens tensions in that environment. And I've been in some really scary situations where tensions in the prison environment turn into violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a fun place to be. I could tell war stories all night, but um, I never, there was never a happy riot in prison.
Did you feel safe on a
I felt
daily
safe. I
basis?
felt safer in prison than I feel at Walmart.
Interesting.
That's the truth.
Huh.
And when, even though you have a whole bunch of felons in one spot, the vast majority want their life to be as easy as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So they go to their jobs, they go to whatever school they're signed up for, if they're signed up for that. They stay out of the way, they don't get in trouble. Vast majority, that's how they go through prison.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a small minority of them are the ones who are trying to get drugs in, cell phones, involved in gangs. I know if you watch television, it looks like everybody in prison is a gang
Yeah.
member.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not accurate
Huh.
at all. The
So,
vast majority are not.
so 3,000 prisoners. How many of those are a concern on a daily basis?
On a unit like that, you have 500 administrative segregation inmates, which the media calls it solitary confinement. It's
Mm.
not. They have human interaction constantly, but those guys are in that environment because they are gang members or they are violent
Mm.
or they're an escape risk.
Mm.
Um, so out of the 3,000, you've got those right off the bat. And then you have different custody levels that denote behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 5 different custody levels, G5 being the worst. And your G5 population will be about 10% of your overall population.
Mm.
So
Okay.
you have about, if you do seg in that, about a third, so about 1,000 guys would probably be
Mm.
troublemakers.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's not. 1,000 sounds
Mm.
like a lot, but you have them in specific areas so you can manage that.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
going in that area, that's what you're facing. The rest of the place, you have issues and things happen, but on a much less frequent basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where you get the opportunity to make the most impact is with those
Mm-hmm.
guys that are already doing okay. There's one guy that I knew when I was a 23-year-old sergeant. I first supervised him on back then it was called close custody, but now it's G5 custody. He was a gang member, he was a Crip,
Mm.
uh, troublemaker, always into something, always fighting. And it seemed like every time I moved units, that guy moved too. I would turn
Mm.
around and there he was. And at the end, he ended up paroling from a substance abuse program I was over. and he's doing great. He lives in the Dallas area,
Wow.
doing great.
That's
But
that's got to be so powerful for you that you had impact those lives.
you don't you don't really think about it when it's happening,
Mm,
because what you're trying to do is create the safest environment that you can
mhm.
and trying to keep people from coming back. And most of that is providing opportunity.
Yeah.
And as they go, very rarely is somebody going to reach out to someone in corrections and go, you really made an impact on me.
Oh,
You figure I had a 3-decade career and there's about 10 that call me, but then a bunch will comment on things I get tagged in some groups um, that I never even knew were out of prison.
mm.
Or there's people that I didn't know them, they knew me. I run into people all of the time that knew me in prison. And so far, I've been lucky that those have all been positive relationships.
Well, when you're
That's
a parent and you don't know how you're impacting your child and you see their success in the end, you're
that,
like, okay, I
that's a
I
great
did have
analogy.
something to do with that. So, all right, I got a couple questions and then we're moving on. Do you ever see evidence of many prisoners who had one parent who taught boundaries and the other who didn't, where they kind of failed?
The way that I saw that was from missing parents. Um, a lot of guys came from single parent households
Mm.
or they were raised by a grandmother. And that they tended to be, you saw more of them than you did people who came from 2-parent families.
Okay.
Um, because I could even make the argument in my household, I was so involved with a 24/7 career. I mean, I couldn't turn off my phone even on vacation unless I left the contiguous 48 states.
Wow.
So that phone was a constant. And so my wife
Wow.
carried 85% of the load,
Tough.
uh, guaranteed. But I have a college graduate who's successful. I have one who's about to be a college graduate who's successful um, because she did a great job. I was
Yeah.
present,
There you go.
but there was always something happening on my side.
Amazing.
Um, I think if I hadn't been around at all, she would have still done a great job, but the potential would have been there because she would be having to worry about food on the table and so many other things also. I
Sure.
mean, she had her own career. Mine just sucked up a lot more time.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Chris, you got a question? Oh no, Jennifer has a question.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. I just wanted to say thank you, Darren, for sharing your story. It kind of hit with me because I actually used to work in the criminal justice field.
Okay.
Started off in juvenile detention centers, and I also worked for county jails too.
Mm,
So, but I understand the pain, and I think part of that recidivism that you're talking about, I think what could possibly help is providing felons with properties that can accept them.
Right.
So I
mm.
guess my question to you is, are there programs being developed or are investors investing in properties that are accepting of those backgrounds?
The properties that will accept people with those backgrounds are not usually in neighborhoods that are conducive to success.
Mm.
Right, right.
Um, as far as you get a lot of you get a lot of pushback from communities
Yep.
when you try to allow people with criminal records moving in. Um, now, individual landlords, people that own one property that make their own decision, they may not. Um, there's one guy I'm pretty sure in my neighborhood that I interacted with before, but I think investors are afraid of the kind of environment that is that you have the potential to get if you get the wrong kind of former felon in there. Um,
So let me continue your
sure.
the question on this. So if the prisoners can't get into a property, where do they end up living? What can we be doing in commercial real estate with some of your direction to help get this across that, hey, we need to help these people rehabilitate in communities where they can be successful? Really great thoughts on this.
And it was a great question. So the most impactful thing that somebody could do would be to not automatically discount somebody because they have a criminal conviction. Do a little talking to them. Find out some of the specifics. A lot of times, a simple Google search will tell you whether they're telling you the truth about their background or not.
Mm.
Now, would I advocate necessarily for sex offenders being moved in just anywhere? I personally wouldn't. My experience with sex offenders are that they are the least likely group to successfully reenter society and not reoffend. That's my personal experience. I'm not offering any data that says that's true. But whereas some of the guys I felt most comfortable around were murderers, because usually that's a one-time crime. And if you look into the specifics of how it happened, you might find that it will never happen again because of circumstances. But automatically discounting somebody just based on the fact that they have a criminal conviction is probably the most harmful thing to that particular area of reentry. So would I advocate just let anybody in? No, but I would advocate find out about them and don't necessarily discount them just because of that conviction. I have a friend I worked with at Cornbread Hustle. Her name's Desi, and Desi was a gang member. She was addicted to meth. She went to prison 2 different times, went to county jail over and over and over. She hit rock bottom the last time she went to prison, and now she got out, went into a transitional house, which was faith-based, and built on that. And she's a homeowner in Fort Worth. She's still with Cornbread Hustle, making good money. Um, she was given that opportunity though to, number one, Cornbread Hustle gave her the means financially, but there were programs through a church here in Dallas, financial literacy, where they actually did a matching funds to help with down payments on a house.
Great
So,
story. I mean, success story.
Exactly. And she's not alone, but she was lucky enough to find that opportunity and reap the benefits of it and take advantage. And you to meet her, you would never guess her past until she tells you about it. But she was a for real scary criminal for 45 years.
Crazy. All right. So I asked you this before, but nobody else heard it. So you're going into becoming an attorney. You're going to be spending 4 years in school.
Right.
What are you most excited about on that journey?
I am, I'm really excited about learning to start with. I enjoy the process of school. When I took the program at SMU, it was a lot of the same work that I'll be doing in law school. And I found that I was good at it and I enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity, number one, to learn. Number two, the particular law school I'm going to is extremely involved in the community. They have community law clinics, they have internships and externships that are involved in helping underserved communities in litigation. And They have an innocence project also, which I intend to apply to. Hopefully I get into that, looking at overturning wrongful convictions. Because while I don't think there are as many as people believe there are, one is too many.
There you go.
I
Well,
want to be involved in that.
I think you'll do a successful job at being an attorney. I hope I never have to call you because I need an attorney to get my kids out of jail. But you certainly have street credit. You've got the street knowledge of how to do and be a good attorney, to advocate for these prisoners, and as well as how to build relationships that are so, so important. And you have seen that. We see that's the success that you have created in a prisoner like Damon West. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your story and insights on prison life and what makes it so important to connect with these people, because success can be made even in the prison in a prison sentence and prison environment. So we appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.